Hey Capre, this is Pastor Chris, and I am so excited to be joining you guys this morning because I've been gone. As many of you know, I took the month of July off, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. But it is now August, and I am back, and I'm excited to be here. And today, we're actually kicking off a new sermon series. This is a 3-week series entitled Back to Normal, but Not Really. Now, the heart behind this series is that many of us, as August begins, we are returning to things that, seemed pretty normal in the past. Whether that's work or school or church, as the pandemic has, changed, many of us are doing things we haven't done in a long time, or doing things maybe a little more like we used to. I don't know about you guys, but just a few months ago, I started being able to go into places without a mask on, which was a weird feeling. And then this summer, I've gotten to travel and go to places that I haven't been allowed to go. And it's been good, but it's been different. The last 18 months, it's changed us. It's changed our world. And so, things are going back to normal, but not really. So the question that we're asking ourselves in this series is, as we go back to life, how do we act as Christians? What is God calling us to do? Now, sometimes Pastor Dan and I, we preach sermons that we love to take a deep dive into Scripture or into theology. And that stuff, that is always fun. I love doing that. In fact, we've got a sermon series coming up in September called What is the Bible? It's based off a book that's going to really challenge us and push us to ask some deep, kind of nerdy questions about what the Bible is and what that means for us. But this series it's going to be a practical series. This might not be the most profound sermon series you ever hear, but I believe that if you apply these teachings, they will have a profound impact on your everyday life. These are messages preached on Sunday to be lived on Monday. And so we're going to dive in this week with week 1 of going back to work. A lot of us, we're going back to the office for the first time, or we're starting a new job, or we're taking on new responsibilities at a job that we've had for a long time. But needless to say, as fall begins, many of us are beginning a new season of work. But here's the truth about work. Well, let me actually ask a question. How many of you have ever struggled to act like a Christian at work? Just go ahead and click the like button. Let me know that I'm not alone. See, work is stressful. And if we aren't careful, it can bring out the worst version of us. And here's why that matters. There's the old kind of Christian saying that you might be the only Bible that someone reads. In other words, you might be the interaction they have with Christianity. In some ways, you are a spokesperson for Christianity and for our church when you're out and about, and especially at work. And when you act like a jerk, people can have a jerk reaction to the faith. They can develop an opinion of what Christianity is based on how they see you, professing Christian, acting at work. I used to be the program director at an organization called the Youth Volunteer Corps, and we worked with AmeriCorps members. And so every year we would bring on 5 new AmeriCorps members, and I went through the process of interviewing and training each of them. And as part of that, they got a lot of swag, a lot of merch with the AmeriCorps name on them. And I used to have to tell them, look, I can't dictate what you do when you're not at work. I mean, I hope that you act right, behave, do good things, but I can't be there to babysit you. But I can demand this, that if you're going to go out and you're going to be stupid, do not do it while wearing something that says AmeriCorps on it. Because when you're wearing that, you represent the entire program. And your stupidity could cost us our grant. And the same is kind of true of our faith. That when we're a Christian and we're out there, we walk around with that name on us. And when we don't behave like God has called us to behave, we hurt the faith. We hurt people's view of the church and of Christianity. So when we are at work, it is important that we are Christ-like. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to dive into 5 things that I believe we can do, 5 practical things that I think we can do to be more Christ-like at work. And we're going to do that by taking a look at Genesis 1, the creation story. And so if you have your Bible or you're using the Bible tab watching this on live.copray.org, you can open up to the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1, and that's where we're going to pull these 5 things, these 5 practical things that I think we can do to be Christ-like at work. And those 5 things, well, let's go ahead and dive in with number 1. Thing number 1, we can segment reality. Now that's probably going to be the weirdest of these that I'm going to give you. So let me explain this one a little bit. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the motivation behind, well, this message today. I've been reading a book during this past month called Win the Day by Mark Batterson. If that name sounds familiar, a couple years ago we did a big series, a big campaign as a church called 40 Days of Prayer, and it was based on a book that he wrote, and this is his newest book. The subtitle is 7 Daily Habits to Help You Stress Less and Accomplish More, which sounded pretty relevant for my life and probably be pretty relevant for yours. But in it, he talks about Sir William Osler at Yale was giving a speech in 1913, and he introduced a phrase to them that has well, it stuck with the author here, and he wrote an entire chapter about it. And that phrase is this: live in day-tight compartments. And he bases it off the idea, this is what he says in the book, we're so fixated on the past and so anxious about the future that we miss the present. He goes on to cite a couple of psychologists who believe, based on their testing, that the average person spends 46.9% of their time thinking about something other than the moment they are living in. See, some of you missed what I just said there because you weren't in the moment. And I do that all the time. I'm so concerned with the past or the future that I'm not here right now. I'm zoned out. And so he asked the question, how do we solve this? And he believes that we segment or we separate our lives, that we live in day-tight compartments. As we look at Genesis 1, this is what we see. We see God creating the world, and the famous way that it's told in Genesis 1 is He does it through days. The 6 days of creation, and the 7th is a day of rest. We'll get to that. But these 6 days, and in each day, He creates certain things, and that's how the story progresses. It progresses in these day-tight compartments. And he argues that when we begin to do this in our lives, it enables us to live in the present. Now, when I worked at World Vision, we did something kind of like this. When we would hold big events, we would have a half marathon or a marathon, we'd have a ton of people come into town, and we just put on this huge ordeal. When we got done, it was so tempting for us to want to dive in and start criticizing all the things that we could do better. Now, I know some of you people out there are like that. Like, you get done with something and you're immediately wondering, what could I improve next time? And while that's important, we made a rule that for 24 hours, we would just live in that moment and celebrate what had just happened before we started reflecting on the past or planning for the future. And that was hugely beneficial because it gave us space to, enjoy what God had just done. Or in the book, he talks about Emmitt Smith, a Hall of Fame running back, and a rule that, he had in his career where after every game, he would give himself 24 hours to either celebrate the victory or mourn the loss. But after that 24 hours, he knew he had to let it go. He couldn't just keep living there, or he would miss out what was happening in the present. And he argues this is what we need to do in our lives. We don't open up Genesis 1 and see each day beginning with God stressing about what had happened the day before, whether he should have created that differently or go back and correct something. Nor does he spend every day worried about 2 days from now or 3 days from now. No, he lives, he creates day by day. And if God can create the world day by day, we should create our lives. We should live our lives day by day in day-tight compartments. And if we can learn to do that, to live Monday on Monday and Tuesday on Tuesday and Wednesday on Wednesday, it allows us to be present at work and to be who God's created us to be each day we're there. Thing number 2, sacred rhythm. How many of you are morning people? Go ahead and click the heart button. I want you to know that every one of those hearts you just saw represents one of the most annoying people on the face of the planet. The people that wake up in the morning and they are just ready to go. They are so happy to be awake. Because the truth is, most of us are not morning people. In fact, right now I want you to click the heart button if you're the type of person that wants to slap a morning person. Yeah, there's a reason that the coffee industry is a $100 billion a year industry. Most of us wake up and it takes us a while to get going. That's natural. That's normal. The problem, though, at least for me, is that I often wake up and have impromptu mornings. In other words, my morning is not planned out at all. I wake up, I don't know what I'm going to have for breakfast. I don't know what I'm going to wear that day. And so everything feels like it's a little bit chaotic. In fact, if I have a day where I wake up and think I might do something, if I wake up and think I might go running, you know what that translates to? I'm not going running. I am not going to do that thing in the morning unless I was ready to do it. I had planned to do it. See, I believe our success in the morning is directly connected to our preparedness in the evening. Now that might just seem like the most basic thing, why are you preaching about this? And I believe that there is actually something sacred to it. Let's turn back to Genesis 1. And I'm going to read to you something that's mentioned after each and every day, something I have read 100 times before. But if you're anything like me, In your head, you probably think it's phrased differently than it actually is. Let me read how each day ends. It says, "And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. And evening passed and morning came, marking the third day." And it goes on and on and on. Notice the order there. The evening passed and the morning came, marking the third day. Now, most of us, if we were writing that in our modern context, would have flipped that around. That morning came and evening passed, marking the first day or the second day or the third day. Because that's how most of us organize our days. But see, Jewish tradition, based on this in Genesis, they actually believe that the day begins and ends at sundown. That's why if you see people celebrating a Jewish holiday, they actually begin the evening before what we would typically consider that holiday. Because that is the sacred rhythm that they see in Genesis 1. And I believe they're on to something. They know that what they do in the evening is going to directly impact how that next day begins in the morning. I believe that that is the pattern that God has created us to live by. And that's very convicting for me. But I've had to learn to begin preparing in the evening for succeeding in the morning. And as we start going back to work and school and church, all things that usually require us to get up early and be somewhere on time, I believe that adopting this sacred rhythm, this pattern found in Genesis 1, can do us a lot of good. That if we take time the night before the day to begin getting ready, and we see that as an act of worship, we can begin to live more like God has created us to live. All right, practical thing number 3, Sabbath rest. And I should just go ahead and throw out a warning right now. I am a hypocrite. You know, I just took an entire month of vacation days. How was I able to do that? Well, 2020. As it was for most of us, 2020 was an insane year. And things very quickly started changing, and that was especially true here at the church. We found out one week we weren't going to be able to meet in person anymore. We had to figure out what it meant to be a church during that time. And being the on-staff geek, it came down to me to really figure out how we were going to take ourselves online. And that wasn't something that I was ready for. So it required a lot of learning and figuring things out. And as part of that, I found myself working more and more. And pretty soon I was working 6 or 6.5 or sometimes 7 days a week. And I forgot the importance of Sabbath. And then on top of that, like many of you, I started working from home. And there are great things about working from home. But one of the not great things about working from home is that you start losing some of the boundaries that you might have had before. You know, before there was a place that I worked and a place that I was with my family. And all of a sudden those were all mixed together. And being at work was the same thing as being at home. And when I was working and when I wasn't working, those lines started to blur. And if anybody can relate to me, just please click the heart button right now, because I have a feeling that I'm not alone. And see, we do this. Even before 2020, we live in a culture that glorifies the hustle. And there's nothing wrong with hustling. In fact, I need reminders in my life to hustle. Much like I was on my 8th grade basketball team, I need a coach from yelling at me to hustle from time to time, to give life my best. But if you hustle and hustle and hustle and never have the humility to admit that you need rest, then you're living in vanity. And soon you're going to find yourself wearing down. And that's exactly where I found myself, and it's exactly why I had to take a month off. Because see, I realized without Sabbath, my mental health wasn't good, my emotional health wasn't good, my physical health wasn't good, and my spiritual health wasn't good. You see, as we turn to Genesis 1, Genesis 1 ends and Genesis 2 begins with this powerful passage right here. It says, if I can get these pages apart, it says, "So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was complete. On the 7th day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all the work of creation." And if the God of the universe, the God that created everything, needed a day of rest, who are we to think that we can go without it? See, I think that if we're going to be Christ-like at work, we have to be Christ-like in Sabbath, in finding Sabbath. Now, I could have titled this section just Sabbath, but I entitled it Sabbath Rest for a reason. Because see, a lot of us carry that hustle mentality into our Sabbath. That we might have a day off of work, but we don't have a day off from work. Like, how many of you have a to-do list to do on your non-work day that is sometimes longer than your to-do list on a work day? Or let me ask this. How many of you have ever gone on a vacation that left you feeling like you need a vacation? See, a couple weeks ago, my family, we went up to Chicago. See, we used to live there. My daughter was born there, but we moved when she was 3 months old. She went back when she was 3, but she's never really seen or experienced the city. So we took a week to go up there and show her all that is Chicago. So we did all the touristy things. We went on an architectural tour. We went to the Navy Pier. We went up in Sears Tower. We went to one of the museums. We spent 2 days shopping on Michigan Avenue. There wasn't a single day during that week that we walked any less than 20,000 steps. And by the time we got home from Chicago, we were exhausted. Is this relatable at all? Some of us do that same thing even with our weekly Sabbath. Our weekends are so packed full of anything that we might have Sabbath, but we don't have rest. See, God is calling us to Sabbath rest. In fact, the Hebrew word at the root of Sabbath means to stop, to cease, to keep. And that's what God is calling us to do. And if we don't do that, we find ourselves, just like I was, in a very unhealthy place. And when we're there, we're not being or living like God created us to live. All right, we got 2 more things that we're going to hit quickly before we wrap this up. And this next one is to see goodness. You know, there's a phrase that we see throughout the creation story. It appears kind of over and over again, and it's really driven home at the end of chapter 1. And it's when we read these words. "Then God looked over all that he had made and saw that it was very good." God looked over all he had made and he saw that it was good. Sometimes, especially at work, especially if we don't love our jobs, it's easy to stop seeing the good, to get cynical, to get super negative. How many of you have ever met somebody who comes home from work and does nothing but complain? Like, based on what they tell you, you're assuming that this is the worst job on the face of the planet. And I know there are some bad jobs out there. And I'm so sorry if you're stuck working one of those right now. But I believe that if we try hard enough, we can find good even in the bad. And I believe that God calls us to do that. Because if we don't, we get bitter. Going back to my trip to Chicago, I want to tell you about one of my favorite mornings. We decided to stay just outside of downtown, where we could park my car in a cheap garage and leave it there all week, and then just take public transit everywhere. We'd ride the L or ride a bus. And so all of us got unlimited transit passes, and that's how we got around throughout the entire week. And one morning, kind of in the middle of the week, we woke up and Sally, my wife, had a pretty bad headache. And she was going to lay down a little longer. And so Ollie and I wanted to give her a little peace and quiet. And so we decided to go on our own little adventure and go find breakfast. And so we left, we walked down to the train, we took it down a couple stops, and we got off and we found a Dunkin' Donut, and then we hopped on a bus and we went over to Target and picked up a few of the things that we needed, and then we got on a bus again and got back on the L again and went back, and it was just city life. And see, nobody has told my daughter that public transit is a chore. To her, it's a ride. Like, she was so excited. We would get on the L and she'd be like, yes! She's like, Dad, I'm going to stand up this time. And she'd be looking out the window, calling out all the things she was seeing. Or one time we hopped on the bus and she's like, we can sit in the middle where it like bends and these seats are up higher and this is awesome. Like she had no idea that it smelled bad. Like, half of the people on there were drunk and the other half just wanted to get home from their jobs. And no, she was having the time of her life. And it was just such a reminder of how important it is to find the good in the little things, in the everyday life. And so this, once again, seems so simple, but I believe that God is calling us to go to work and see goodness. Now, our last and final thing that I believe that God wants us to do to be more Christ-like at work, and that is to seek God. You know, we look at that creation story, and for many, it's a controversial story. Anytime that I go to a place and do like a Q&A time or a Q&A night, I always get questions about Genesis 1. Especially when I'm working with youth and they go to school and they hear about science and they hear about history, and then they want to know how that all fits together. And so, a lot of people come and they ask me about Genesis 1. And I always explain to them that I'm not a scientist. I'm not a historian. I don't know exactly how or when this story takes place, or how or when the world was created. See, I'm a theologian. So I might not know how or when, but I know who. See, I always tell those students, those people asking the questions, that I don't know exactly how the world came to be. But I know that it came to be because God was behind it. See, He was the creator, the artist making it happen. As you read Genesis 1, that's the point of the story, is that God created. God was the one behind all of this. And I believe, as Paul tells us in the New Testament, that if we look at creation, we can see God. I believe what Jesus says, that when He tells us, if you seek, you will find. See, I believe that if we look at the world around us and we seek God out, we will find God there. Sometimes I think we spend so much time praying and asking God to show up, and God's sitting there telling us, I've been here the whole time. Just look for me. Seek me. Seek God. And see, that's what we need to do at work, is to seek God no matter where we are. No matter whether we're sitting in a cubicle, standing at a register, or waiting tables, or preaching a sermon. Wherever we are, whatever our job is at the moment, we can use that as an opportunity to seek God and share God. Now, when we begin to see God at work around us, we begin to share God with those around us. Now, I remember Mother Teresa in an interview. Here she is in one of the most broken parts of the world, working with some of the sickest people who should be the most hopeless people, and she's serving them day after day. Somebody asked her how she stays positive. And she told them that when she looks at the face of each of those she's serving, she sees the face of Jesus looking back. And I have to wonder, what if each of us approached our jobs, if we approached work that way? What would happen? I think what would happen is that the world would be a better place, because we would be Christ-like. We would be living like God called us to live. And when we do that, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what God longs for us to do. Martin Luther King Jr., such a profound prophet. But he speaks these words that have always stuck with me. He says, if a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. My closing prayer today, it's those words. You'll find them in the notes tab, but I've took out some of the words and left blanks so that you can put in, your work, your job, what it is you do. If you're a teacher, or a nurse, or a janitor, or a principal, or whatever. What if we did it in a way that sought God, in a way that left the people around us looking at us thinking there's something about the way they work that's different? Paul in the book of Colossians, in the last chapter, he says that everything we do, whether it's in word or deed, we should do it. We should work as if we're working for God Himself. And I think that when we do that, just like God in Genesis 1, we begin to create something beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's get to work.